Well, thank you. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the invitation to come and address the group here this morning. When I asked Jim what I should talk about, he said, whatever you want. And that's a dangerous topic, a dangerous thing to say. And as I prepared my remarks, I was very pleased that my company provided the wherewithal for me to be here, but I need to point out the contents are my thoughts alone, so if you don't like it, don't take it out on them. So I'd like to get started here this morning. We got some students out there in the audience, because I'm going to really address the students here this morning. So in 1950, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a seminal work entitled Interplanetary Flight: An Introduction to Astronautics. And in the introduction to that book, he wrote these words: "The choice, as H.G. Wells once said, is the universe or nothing. Though men and civilizations may yearn for rest, for the Elysian dream of the lotus eaters, that is a desire that merges imperceptibly into death. The challenge of the great spaces between the worlds is a stupendous one, but if we fail to meet it, the history of our race will be drawing to its close. Humanity will have turned its back on the still untrodden heights and will be descending again the long slope that stretches across 1,000 million years of time down to the primeval sea." Wow. What a challenge. Progress is being made. This picture, of course, from the robotic spacecraft New Horizons of the planet Pluto. The universe or nothing. That is what I think all of us in this room really believe at our core. Space exploration, we all believe, is important for a number of reasons, and they're all familiar to this crowd. We heard a lot of talk about that yesterday. We don't need to sell anybody in this room, I think, on the need or the importance of space exploration. In fact, this meeting is one of those kind of aerospacey meetings where all of those of us who are true believers are in attendance. And at this meeting, we have the epitome of us talking to ourselves, once again, something that we do far too often. But let's take advantage of the opportunity to talk frankly among ourselves. Now, let's hope the media can turn off their cameras and stop their recordings, because what I want to say here today, what I have to say here today, is amongst the family, a message for us and about us. Personally, I'm an O'Neillian, persuaded decades ago by the writings of Gerard K ONeill about the place of humanity in the universe. That place is everywhere. So inside the family now, please hear this advice. We need to knock off internecine take-no-prisoner debates. Moon, Mars, asteroids, which should we choose? My answer is yes, all of the above. In all the other places in the solar system too. We will do them all. It's just a matter of how fast and in what order. But if we keep squabbling amongst ourselves so as to confuse the rest of the world about goals and objectives, then we will not get anywhere. Similarly, the argument about a big rocket versus maybe a not so big rocket but existing, we need to use what we've got when we've got it, and we need to develop what we can afford. Von Braun himself once said about developing the Saturn V, going to the moon, that going to the moon without it would be like flying the Berlin airlift with Piper Cubs. No one can say it can't be done, but the logistics are overwhelming. We'll talk later for those of you that are too young to remember the Berlin airlift. If we can build and afford a big rocket, then by all means we need to do so. It is really important. If not, then we need to start thinking about how to divide the mission up into Piper Cub-sized packages, but still get on with it. Still get on with it. This is really my message for the family. It's not a really happy message. My message is, in the great gray words of the first administrator of NASA, get the hell on with it. 2 years ago, when I spoke at this conference during the government shutdown, I told you that we needed to fly soon, and we need to fly often, and we need to figure out how to get that done. 2 years later, I am sorry to report that we are not 2 years closer to the first human flight of the exploration systems. If anything, we're further away. No wonder I'm frustrated. In spite of the progress we've made, it's not happening very fast. If we're honest with each other, then I think we will all acknowledge that we're frustrated at the pace of progress. In our frustration, it is natural to try to place the blame somewhere. I am reminded of the words of the founding father John Adams, who once famously remarked that one disreputable man is called a disgrace, and 2 disreputable men are called a law firm, and 3 or more disreputable men are called a Congress. We all like that, right? But listen to me. It is not Congress's fault that we are where we are today. If anything, they are accurately representing their constituents' viewpoints. Do you want to blame Congress? No. Do you want to blame the president? It is not the president's fault that we are where we are. Do you want to blame OMB? Oh yeah, let's go there. Do we want to blame OSTP? Do we want to blame the big aerospace corporations? Do we want to blame the little new space disruptor organizations? It's really easy to point the finger and blame somebody else, but I'm here to tell you, all in the family now, this is just us talking, folks, that they are not to blame. If you want to know who to blame, you need to look in the mirror. It's us. You're not satisfied with the pace of progress? We need to change that. So, everybody's talking about the Martian movie right now. In another month, we'll be talking about the Star Wars movie. So, in the words of Yoda, young Padawan, learn new skills you must. Master yourself you must if you are to be successful. Or as a famous general officer that I once knew said, I am not interested in your little problems. I'm only interested in results. Yes, the blame falls on all of us. And why is that? Because we expect too much from others. One of my mother's favorite stories from my childhood that she used to tell me often when I was a teenager was about an immigrant family. One day the oldest son approached his father, a man who had come to America, worked hard all his life in menial jobs to make a better life for his family, and the oldest son said to his father, I would like to go to college. His father was quiet, thought about it for a long time, and he finally said, you have my permission. Only a few people got that. You see, we have permission to go to Mars and asteroids and even the moon and all the other places, really. What is really holding us up is that we're asking for the taxpayers to foot the bill. We're asking for public money. Once you ask for public money, you have to play the political game. And if you don't want to play that game, or if you want to play that game, you cannot complain about the rules. You just need to learn how to do it. 2 years ago, I told you a historical tale about the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and don't worry, I'm coming to another historical story. But we talked about how that was a great technological and engineering feat, but the really impressive part of the story was the creative financing and the efficient organization that made it possible. 2 years ago, I said we need to learn from that example how to be creative, innovative, flexible, and hardworking. Not just hardworking in a technical sense, but organizationally smart and financially creative. I'm here to repeat that story. Like our predecessors in the 1960s, or even the cinematic hero that we're all watching, Mark Watney these days, we need to be innovative with what we've got. Remember the Apollo 13 story? How to make a device to get the CO2 out of the spacecraft, and you got to do it with this pile of stuff. This is what we've got. This is what we need to do. We need to figure out how to do it. We have to find an opportunity to thrive and succeed, even in the face of what sometimes seem to be overwhelming circumstances. And when plan A doesn't work, we better the heck come up with a plan B and try to execute that. If those of us in this family believe that space exploration is going to make that dream come true, to save humanity in the long run, we must work harder than we've been working. We must be more creative than we've been today. We must do what it takes to be successful. fighting internally, listen to me, fighting internally or blaming the system as it exists are not productive ways to proceed. I have a recurring nightmare or two. First nightmare is that I wake up at 2 in the morning is that someday an MMOD strike will take out the space station and we won't have a human spaceflight program. My second recurring nightmare is that in 2 years, a little year and a half really, January 20th, 2017, a new administration will roll into office. They won't know what to do about space because it's never been a campaign or election issue, and they call Norm Augustine from the retirement home to lead us. And yet another Blue Ribbon Commission study about what to do in space. And that commission, whether it's led by Norm or not, will say exactly the same thing that every other Blue Ribbon study committee has said for the past 40 years. NASA should go back to the moon, to Mars, to the other places, but unless there's a significant increase in the budget, NASA will not be able to do anything very interesting. And so, because they probably have other fiscal priorities, on about February 1st, 2018, the new administration will cut the big rocket and the deep space capsule, and we're left trying to figure out how to get to Mars with Piper Cubs. What do you call it when you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results? You've heard that. If we are to conquer the universe, then we have got to change our tactics. We must steal from the playbook of those disruptive forces who can get things done in the existing environment. It is not an easy lesson for a bunch of techno-geeks who would rather debate the proper mixture ratio selection for the main engine rocket stage and then get uncomfortable whenever the conversation turns to finances or organization. There must be a revolution how we get things done financially and organizationally. Things have got to change if we are going to succeed. I'm here to tell you. In his fictional tale of a rich industrialist who bankrolled the first moon mission, Robert Heinlein created the character Delos de Harriman. Intent on getting to the moon, he put his complete business empire behind the effort. And when the money ran short, he never gave up trying to find new ways to earn or raise more money. His business motto was, "We also walk dogs." That's what we need to adopt. We need to be creative and innovative and do what is necessary to get the job done. And this is what I've experienced in the past several years working in a small company. You have to be innovative, creative, and resilient in the face of failure. Never give up. Finally, we have to figure out how to be safe and successful enough to go fly. But I want to remind you in this enterprise where we're talking about exploration, it is very important, it's of paramount importance to keep safety always in front of us, consider it in all our plans. But in exploration, safety is not the most important thing. Safety is not the most important thing. In exploration, the most important thing is to actually go. We need to quit doing non-value-added work. We need to figure out what's valuable and worthwhile versus what is a bureaucratic knee-jerk to something that happened in the past. So enough of this. I promised you a historical story. Let's buckle down, get to work, get this done. And meanwhile, I'm going to tell you a little bit about history, because if we don't learn from history, we will repeat it. You know, history doesn't happen automatically. History unfolds because of the choices that we make. The United States is the most powerful and richest nation in the world right now, but it's not guaranteed that we will always remain so. So let me tell you this story, and the media can turn their cameras back on now. That they did turn them off, right? You may have heard the story before, but let's go back 600 years, and we're going to talk about the only superpower in the world 600 years ago, the richest nation in the world 600 years ago, China. In the 15th century, the Ming Empire was vast and ruled a tremendous number of people. It was considerably more powerful and richer than all the petty fiefdoms of contemporary Christian Europe put together. The Ming Empire was fabulously wealthy. The emperor wanted a new capital, so they built the city we know as Beijing from empty grazing land. The emperor wanted to feed the people in his new city, so to bring the food to the people in the new capital, they built the Grand Canal, an engineering feat that was not rivaled until the Suez and Panama Canals. The emperor wanted a navy, so he appointed an admiral to build a fleet of 1,500 ships. That's about 5 times larger than the American Navy is today. The largest of these ships rivaled the size of World War II support aircraft carriers. They were the largest wooden ships ever built, the largest sailing ships ever built, ships big enough to dwarf the later ships of the European exploration. It was not until the age of steam and steel 400 years later that larger ships were built. In this Navy, there were over 30,000 sailors. China was so inconceivably rich in those days that the cost of this vast navy was an inconsequential fraction of the resources available to the emperor. The Chinese admirals set out on many voyages of discovery and commerce to the Philippines, Malaysia, India, and as far as the east coast of Africa. For over 40 years, the Chinese Navy made voyages which resulted in hegemony, total political control over half the world. Now, not half the known world as those ignorant Europeans might talk about, but half the total world. From the Cape of Good Hope through India to the Bering Strait, from Australia to New Zealand to the west coast of the Americas, trade and tribute poured into China. All of these accomplishments are well known and well documented by historians. In a recent book, and controversial book I might add, retired British Royal Navy Sea Captain Galvin Menzies provides evidence that the Chinese Navy circumnavigated the world in 1421, discovering Antarctica in the south and coming within 200 miles of the North Pole in the other direction. They didn't teach you this in school, did they? Captain Menzies has evidence that the Chinese Navy set up colonies not just on the orient-facing east coast of Africa, but on the west coast as well. Chinese colonies in the Caribbean, near present-day Providence, Rhode Island, and on Greenland. Wow. How did the Europeans get this map, dated 1418, this accurate map of the world, 75 years before Columbus and a century before Magellan? They got it from the Chinese. So the Chinese were the world's greatest superpower. They controlled half the world and explored the entire globe. In 1415, the tiny Principality of Portugal put everything on the line. Portugal was insolvent. Its prince was in debt, its court threadbare. After a huge debate, the Portuguese borrowed just enough money to finance a few ships and their crews. With less than 24 ships, none of them very large even by the miserable European standards of the day, the Portuguese fought a successful sea battle in the Mediterranean and captured the port of Ceuta on the North African coast. This opened up ever so slightly trade with the Orient, especially increased trade in the highly desired spices from the region. The scrappy Portuguese decided to go forward, learning the lesson that taking risks was worthwhile, that losses could be accepted. They invented a new type of ship suited for the stormy Atlantic, the caravel, the first really new ship design since ancient times. The caravel became not only the first, or only the first in a series of continually improving and innovative ship designs that have continued even to the present day. The Portuguese earned the admiration and envy of all the European states, and that every country tried to emulate them, and thus started the age of wooden ships and iron men. For the next centuries, the European courts repeatedly decided to go forward by fits and starts, for good reasons and for bad reasons, always with endless debate, generally teetering on the edge of financial insolvency. But the West Europeans made the decision to go forward into the world for trade, treasure, discovery, and glory. They immersed the West in new ideas, new technologies, and new innovations. Meanwhile, back in China, after a generation of astounding voyages, the great Ming admiral died at sea. The emperor also died, and the new emperor, young emperor, came under different influences. These voices counseled the young emperor to turn inward. Surely China had enough problems to solve in China. Why waste time and energy exploring? These advisors told the emperor that there was nothing in the world to match Chinese culture. That was true. They told the emperor that there were no goods in the world to rival Chinese goods. That was true. In short, they concluded there was nothing out there for China, a conclusion that sounds logical but is far from true. They advised that China should protect what they had from the foreigners who wanted what the Chinese had. The emperor followed this advice and completed the Great Wall to keep foreigners out. He built a new capital, the Forbidden City, to keep the citizens of his own country out. The emperor ordered the fleet to dry dock, to be burned. The sailors were disbanded, put to work on domestic products like building roads. It became a capital offense to build a sailing ship with more than 2 masts. The emperor even ordered that all the records of all the voyages be burned, lest someone follow their example. China decided to turn inward. When the Portuguese explorer Bernardo Dias and Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope coming from the west to the east, they found legends of white ghost ships that had come 2 generations earlier. Africans all along the east coast of Africa were wearing Chinese-style hats and coats. When Magellan crossed the Pacific Ocean and claimed the Philippine Islands for King Charles of Spain, he found silk and porcelain, all imported from China years before, but the traders that had brought them had vanished. All throughout the Indies, Europeans found reminders of a culture that had been of great influence, but which had disappeared completely from the scene, Chinese culture. The Chinese course led inexorably to stagnation, then to dissolution, then to decay, and finally to destruction. For there came a day when the Portuguese and the other Europeans carved up the pitifully weak remnants of China for their own political use. 500 years later, the great 20th century Chinese historian Wei Pu concluded the choice of direction was critical. The Chinese turned inward, the Europeans went forward. That Chinese historian observed, and I quote, "The history of the world for the last 500 years has been the history of the West." Choices matter. There are consequences, some unseen at the time, but one constant has held true throughout human history. Taking risks and finding new knowledge, new lands, new ways of doing things, new culture, new ideas has always paid off. Staying home is the short road to failure. So today, are we to be the Chinese or the Portuguese? Which direction will we choose? There are no guarantees in this quest, only rewards for those who are willing to seize opportunity, to imaginatively solve problems, to take risks, to work hard, and show courage. In the depths of World War II, Winston Churchill addressed the Canadian Parliament with these words: "We have not journeyed all this way, across the centuries, across the ocean, across the mountains, across the prairies, because we're made of sugar candy. Time to show what we are made of." Are the obstacles going to make us take our ball and go home, dropping out of the competition with just because it's hard? Or will we actually do the things that are hard, give a measure to the best that's in us? The answer, my friends, is up to you. Thank you.